and I have sandwiches for people who registered. I have sandwiches coming, and so there's a turkey sandwich and a vegetarian sandwich that's available. So there's that. So what do you know, or why are you interested in this conversation of cultural appropriation? What were you hoping we would talk about, or what do you think the conversation will deal with or talk about? Yes.
Um,
Can you say your name?
sure, my name's Mara,
All right, Mara, and your program.
art therapy.
Art therapy. Okay.
So I guess for me, like on a personal basis, it's, I want to. There's so many wonderful things that come from many cultures, and some of them that kind of, like speak to me on a soul level, but I do not want to just appropriate and say I'm taking this. So how do I recognize the wisdom that's all around without saying like this is my thing, I'm going to do it like this.
Yep. Yep. That's a good question, right? So
Yeah.
so how can I engage and admire and take the learnings from another culture without usurping
Right.
the meaning of it, the spirit of it, but it actually speaks to me,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think we'll engage that question. All right. Other folks, what were you hoping we would talk about, or what would you like to talk about? What do you know about the topic? Yes.
My name's Megan, and I'm in the career counseling
Okay.
area. I guess when I saw the title of the seminar, the piece about the recent news article with Rachel, and I'm sorry, I can't pronounce.
Yep, that's fine. Rachel's fine.
Rachel.
Yeah.
That fascinated me because I think a lot of individuals um, do relate to cultures that may not be their biological, and so I kind of I'm trying to wrap my head around that one and
Yeah.
just gain some insight from different perspectives.
Okay. Yeah.
I had sympathy and some compassion for her
Yep.
to some degree that I think that our mass media did not.
Yep. So we'll talk about even this idea of what a culture is, right? So what we know about human behavior is that all human behavior is purposeful. It serves a purpose. People don't just do stuff because they just want to do it. Sometimes they think that is the case, but in fact, what we know is that their behavior is helping them accomplish what? Starts with G and ends in O's. Right? So their behavior is helping them to accomplish goals of some sort, right? So what our job is to help people recognize what those goals are. And so we'll talk about that as well. And so in the case of Rachel, the woman from Spokane who
NAACP.
Yep, she was an NAACP director for the state of
Washington.
Was it for the state of Washington or for the city of Spokane? I can't remember. But at any rate, she grew up white, but has taken on this black identity and identifies herself as being black, but not African American. So she makes some distinctions that we'll kind of talk about. We won't spend a great deal because people will write books about her mindset and how she kind of got to where she is. And so we're going to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation, and I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of the PowerPoint because I don't know that we'll necessarily be able to get through all the slides. There are only 14, but there's a lot of content in them. So Ohio State University started with their students started a program called I'm Not a Costume. And what they did was they looked at a lot of the Halloween costumes that were in the mass markets and had people from those cultures that are depicted in these costumes create this public service set of announcements that said, I'm not a costume. And so many of us have gone to parties, gone to gatherings, particularly around Halloween, where we see people dressed up as other people. And what is people's response to that? Or why do people do that? Or what do they think when they try to portray another person from another culture, what do they usually say about that? That it's cute. It's just fun, right? And what's really interesting is that typically it's a dominant culture mimicking a subordinate culture in some way. Right? So that's interesting. I think it's also interesting that some of that cultural appropriation has, we can see it as really egregious in like Halloween costumes and stuff like that. But then we see that cultural appropriation a little bit less benign when it becomes more socially acceptable. For example, there's a race in Minneapolis, and I think it's called the Race of Colors. Is that right? Where you're running the race and people throw colors at you. Right? It's called the Color Run. Right? It's called the Color Run. Does anyone know where that comes from? It comes from India, right? In all of the literature that I've seen, I've never heard any reference to where they got that practice in the first place. Secondly, I don't know that people know that that is not only a festive time to do that, but there's some significance to throwing the colors and what the colors mean that gets lost when we're raising funds for pink, right? When we're just doing this fun run that we totally, and excuse my French, that we bastardize something that is meaningful to groups of people, right? So we'll talk about this idea of cultural appropriation. And I like using Wikipedia, not because it is a scholarly article, but it is at the fingertips of the masses, right? And so lots of people go there to get information or look at information. So that's typically kind of where I go until I'm writing something that's a real thought-provoking piece. But when I'm doing kind of general things, I go to Wikipedia. And one of the things that Wikipedia shares with us is that cultural appropriation is a sociological concept which views the adoption or use of elements of one culture by members of a different culture as largely a negative phenomenon. Cultural appropriation differs from cultural acculturation and cultural assimilation, right? So appropriation means what? Just the word appropriation. That we just take, right? What does acculturation mean? Acculturation.
Isn't that kind of like someone from one culture getting into?
Yes, so learning about, learning within, kind of joining, kind of being a part of, and then there is cultural assimilation, which is what?
Forced to take on and then the norm or the dominant.
What's that?
The dominant.
Yeah, so you lay down your culture and you become like the dominant culture. So homogenization. So we all become, the melting pot. Woohoo! Right? What are we melting into? That's the scary thing, right? Hey, come on in, man. Thanks. You can just sit right here.
Thank you. How's it going?
So, which is which?
Yeah,
you gotta individually wrap them. Oh, they wrap them?
You want me to do that?
Yeah. So, because it gets weird.
Yeah, it's true.
So I was trying to be clear as clear as I could about that. So what would the thing? So what?
Yeah, so all the pictures were that big and then all
Yeah, so 6 is what?
the sharing.
The sharing.
And then 4 turkey now. Yeah.
So I have enough sandwiches that are supposed to be cut in half and individually wrapped.
Yeah, I wanted to do
Yeah.
that.
Is there some knives over there?
Yeah, so they are cut in half already. They just didn't wrap them. So I can. So so veggies. Do you have any veggies? You're welcome. All right. And then I guess everyone else is turkeys. We can. Go Sarah. Serve your turkey. All right. Turkey, turkey, turkey.
I just
So,
dropped in.
but it looks like I have, actually looks like everybody can have a whole sandwich. Yes. So would you like one?
I just ate.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. All right. Okay. So good. No. All right. So cultural appropriation. So it's important to recognize the difference between those things, right? So the idea of appropriating meaning you're taking it. Assimilation, acculturation, and assimilation at least mean what? What's the underlying kind of relationship between those two things? Appropriation means that you're taking it, which probably means you don't have what with the you don't have permission, and secondly, you probably don't have a relationship with the culture. So you're picking and choosing, and you're saying blah blah blah. Now, one thing I did, and we'll talk about this because it is important to recognize the context that you're in, right? So there are certain things that I do because of the context that I'm in that someone might say is appropriation, but I might say that it is acculturation or assimilation, trying to deal with what the environment is. But the context is extremely important. So, more PowerPoint cuts out, we'll go to. So people are looking for, in terms of their goals, they're all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. People learn, change, and grow. They do what they think works, even when it doesn't work, because in the past, it was something that worked for them. All human behavior is goal-directed, which means that everything that someone does is trying to, in some way, get one of these or a combination of these things. And attitude is a reaction to goals. So when you have a negative attitude that you're faced with, you know that the person is not reaching their goals. So they're not getting access to significance, belonging, or safety, either one or a combination. So what is this idea of culture? Many of you have been exposed to the iceberg theory of culture. Has anyone been exposed to that? The idea that the physical part of the iceberg that actually shows is such a small part of the greater iceberg. And that the part of culture that we can see is such a small part, and the more important part is under the water. I like more biological metaphors because we're constantly changing and growing. And so what I like to talk about is this idea that culture is much like a carrot, right? So there is the root, and then there is the canopy, or the part that you can see. And we'll talk about this root as being the values of a culture. They're the deep parts of the culture. And then there's the canopy, which we'll refer to as the artifacts. Those are the things that you can see when you interact with different cultures, right? So let's start with some of the artifacts. What are things that you can see about how cultures might be different using your five senses? What are some things you might be able to see that indicate that cultures might be different? So their food, right? So the type of food that they eat, how the food is prepared, the spices or the lack of spices that may be in different kinds of food. All right, what else? Appearance, more specific.
Like how they dress, how they wear their hair.
Yeah, so how they wear their hair, how they dress. even their selection of materials, right? So some cultures you can't mix cottons and polyesters, right? So those things are important. Things that come to mind for me are things like dance, music, right? So all of these artifacts, which are things that we can see about a culture. Now, the interesting thing about artifacts is that they have, very much like our carrot and its canopy, they have a symbiotic relationship, meaning that they're connected together and they feed one another, right? So how successful would the carrot be in terms of holding nutrients without its canopy? Would it be very effective? Would it grow to be very large? Probably not, right? And if the canopy did not have a carrot, how effective would it be in its maturation? Not very effective at all, right? And so there's a symbiotic relationship. So the canopy gets all of it goes through, uses photosynthesis to store all of those things in the root. And the root actually provides the foundation for the canopy. So there's a systematic and a symbiotic relationship between those two. Now, what sometimes happens is, so the artifacts are directly related to the values. And what might be some values that cultures hold? What might be examples of values? How they treat their elderly, right? What it means to be an elder, right? Religion. So how do we practice our beliefs? What our beliefs are? Or in some cases, we don't have any particular religious beliefs, right? The concept of time, the concept of life and death, right? So these are all things that our relationship to nature, those are all things that are values of a culture. Now, here is the trick, that the canopy comes out of the root, which leads us, if we follow that logic, that artifacts come out of what? They come out of values. So when you see a woman with a hijab on, that's not a fashion statement, although sometimes they look really good, you know, they have some really fancy ones. But primarily, that's not a fashion statement. It's a statement of values. Sometimes we'll see people with different kinds of adornments, earrings or tattoos or other pieces of makeup that they use to adorn themselves. What we have to understand is that those artifacts come from values. Now, here's where it becomes problematic. It becomes problematic when we start thinking about this idea of culture, when we separate the canopy, the artifacts, from their values. So when the artifacts are separated from their values, they become stereotypes. Have you ever heard a stereotype and you go, well, isn't it true? What has happened is you see the artifacts, but you don't know how it's attached to the values. So those things become stereotypes. And when a culture is no longer attached to its artifacts, if I'm growing carrots and I accidentally cut off the canopy, do I know where that carrot is? No, I don't. Ellis Island cut off the canopy. It said, as folks were coming into the country, they said, you know what, leave your stuff behind. And so people came here and they said, well, we don't know who we are because we don't have our artifacts. So let's borrow someone else's artifacts because we don't know who we are, right? We also know that, some of us are carrots, and I'd like to just kind of expand on this metaphor. Some of us are peanuts, some of us are radishes, some of us are sweet potatoes. But when we try to grab someone else's canopy, how does that necessarily work for us? Doesn't necessarily work for us, right? So, I will say that this is a metaphor, and it has its limitations, and I encourage you to explore what those limitations might be. But this is a way to start thinking about how to deconstruct this idea of culture in a really profound way. All right. So here are some examples of cultural misappropriation. I think it's really interesting that as I was doing my research, most of the instances of cultural appropriation or misappropriation use a lot of native symbols. This is Pharrell from The Voice. I don't know if anyone watches that show, right? So he has a headdress on. H&M. In their stores, I don't know if you've ever been to those stores. I can no longer fit in their clothes because they're like, I don't know what a size 00 is. Like, really? So headdresses and Indian garbs, and there's this phenomenon that people like to talk about, the Indian princess. Has anyone ever heard that? Did you know that that is a colonial term, which means that came from a colony, an emperor, a king, and there are no kings in how Native Americans think about themselves. So the idea of having a Native American princess is preposterous because they don't see themselves as a colonial power. So there are tons of instances of that. I've had to repent because I was young and dumb, and I did what people told me. When I was in high school, I participated in a play, and it was the most awesome play I had ever been in. I had the title role in this play, and I got my lines down, and I was really good at doing it. And the name of the play was The Mikado. Does anyone ever see it? Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado, right? So it's in a fictitious Japan, and so they had us dressed up in kimonos and Fu Manchus and all this kind of stuff. All these, and it was a multiracial cast, right? So we just look beautiful in all these things. But as an adult, you're nostalgic about things when you get older, and you say, what? Let me go back to that. So as an adult, I went back and I actually watched the Gilbert and Sullivan play, The Mikado, and I was absolutely horrified. It was the most racist thing I had ever seen, and I participated in that joyfully and willingly, unbeknownst to me. And so a lot of times when we talk about, this is Katy Perry at one of her concerts, dressed up as a geisha. We have this. There are lots of Sports Illustrated does this a lot with people of color, where they'll have them as an accessory as a part of one of their layouts, right? And so there's no way that she's going to be in the Sahara Desert with just this, right? And then there's Mike Tyson, who misappropriated his tattoo, and the tattoo that he wears is a symbolic warrior tattoo from a particular group of people that he took. He said, you know what, I'm a warrior too. But nobody said he was a warrior but himself. What happens if you qualify yourself? You're not qualified, right? So, I am going to be a cardiologist, and I certify myself. How many, can I get a job? Right? Yeah, no, you don't want me touching, right? So those are some examples. There are some examples here of people who've gotten tattoos, and they didn't mean what they thought they meant, right? So those are some examples of misappropriation. I found some videos that I thought were kind of interesting around those same kinds of kinds of pieces, so I'll play one right now.
Nothing says cultural refinement quite like your tribal tattoo. Preserving the art of ancient civilizations is clearly a matter you hold close to your heart. You literally wear your love for them on your sleeve. Someone who wishes to protect cultural ambassadors like yourself wants you to know that those protein shakes you've been pounding are full of artificial ingredients and scary chemicals. They want you to switch to organic fuel from organic value. We respect your desire to save the heritage of ancient tribes. And in turn, we want to save you.
So they have this whole campaign called Save the Bros. And that's their campaign. But the idea is that when people appropriate a culture, particularly if they're honoring that culture, what they're saying is, I want to save this. I want to preserve this. What's the problem? What's the problem with me saying I am a heart surgeon? I'm not. Why? I've not been recognized. So when I start taking stuff from other people's culture, the biggest problem is what? There's no values behind it. But nobody approved me to do that. Nobody asked me to save their culture or to save them. The last of the Mohegans. Nobody asked me to do that, right? So that's important. That's a little lecture by me, so we'll keep going because you get the live thing. So this is one of the things that led me to even having this conversation, which, are people familiar with Robin Thicke and Blurred Lines? Right? So this is where Robin got this idea that he could take something and kind of make it his own, from a guy by the name of Pat Boone.
Across Canada hit the right Casio, jumping in the fence position this week, to be voted. And here to sing it in person is the man who made it ahead. One of America's greatest recording stars, Pat Boone.
Not bad, right? Pat Boone did a really good job. He made that song a hit. Does anyone know who wrote and originally sang that song? Little Richard. How different was Little Richard's version than Pat Boone's version? A lot different, right? So let's hear Little Richard talk about that.
Ready for it. You know, they didn't understand it. Hey, what is this, you know? And then they took Pat Boone and threw Pat Boone on me. It wasn't something that was done in the beginning when it was rhythm and blues, because it was supposed to be not nice music at all. So we didn't have white artists doing black music. We'll make even more money. And Pat Boone said, oh, what, boom. And I still said, oh, what, boom. And the white kids won't hear, what, boom. Whoa, they want to hear me. And so they would still bring me in the house. And they didn't want their mama to know it was not. So they put Pat Boone on top of the bed. They put me in the car. But I'm still in the same house.
What does this idea of cultural appropriation do to people, do to a culture? What's going on, man?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Keep me honest. What does it do to a culture when someone else just snatches it, right? So here is little Richard, he's just going for it. It's so and then Pat just moves it out. He's the Bobby Bublé of right. So what does that do? What does that say? It devalues them, right? That's nice that you did that thing, but we know better. We know how to take what you did and make it better, right? And how we make it better is to make it look and sound like us. Right? So what occurs is this illusion of dehumanizing impact on folks. And I say that it is an illusion because how are you born? Were you born anything other than human? No, you were born human. Can you be anything less than human? No. Can you act anything less than human? You can be tricked into giving up your humanity and acting as if you're not human, right? And so bigotry plays into those illusions. And typically, bigotry is a frozen emotional state where your ethnocentrism, your center of yourself, the center of your world becomes you, and you are frozen in that emotional state. Right? Prejudice is a frozen mindset that this is the way I think about things, and there is no other thing to think about. And then micro-inequity is the concept that I'm not really racist, but I'm just a little bit racist on that issue or on that topic, or I don't think women should do this, and I think only men should do that, and I think those immigrants should be there, and so I'm not really outwardly hurting anybody. I'm just opinionated, right? And then there is full discrimination, which is measured by the law. When you break the law, that is where you come into the realm of discrimination. Right? Anything less than breaking the law is a micro-inequity, and these other two factors kind of fall in line with those things. So a micro-inequity refers to the way in which individuals are either singled out or overlooked, ignored, or otherwise discounted based on unchangeable characteristics such as race or gender. Right? And micro-inequities has a direct impact on people's discretionary effort. And discretionary effort is the quality or the amount or the attitude in which a person chooses to give towards the completion of a contract or obligation based on perceived quality of their emotional or their personal experience. So, if I'm getting treated poorly at work because I'm tall and handsome and humble, am I going to give my 100% best at work? If people are teasing me, talking about me, not inviting me to meetings, all these, no, I'm not, right? And so my discretionary effort is affected by that. And so if I don't feel good, my discretionary effort is going to go down. If I do feel good, my discretionary effort will go up, right? So those are some important concepts. So one of the things, so there's a documentary called White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men, and this is a part of the documentary that we won't get a chance to see, but it'll be in the PowerPoint, so when I send it to you, you can have access to it. One of the things that's really interesting is that as a part of what is the most valuable resource on the planet? What is the most valuable resource on the planet? What's that?
Water.
Water. More valuable than water. More valuable than love. More valuable than life. Your soul. Your life energy, your spirit, right? So the slave trade, right? So they went and they grabbed people because they wanted their life energy to produce something, right? So the British, and it was really funny because the British tried to do that to the continent of India, to a whole continent. The British tried to do it to a whole continent, but they couldn't do it. Why? Because the Indians knew something the British didn't. You can't make people do what they don't want to do. And so the Indians sat out. They had sitting strikes until Gandhiji said, "Look, Britain, you're going to leave, and when you leave, we're going to be friends because you can't have our life energy. You can't have our soul." Right? So when we start talking about this idea of what's happened to the Native Americans, what was the first thing that was taken? Their land was taken. Then what came next? Their way of life was taken. Their language was taken. Their education. We sent them to boarding schools, right? What happened to the population? What is the population like now of Native Americans? It's very small. It is so small that the state of Minnesota won't take records because they can't get a critical population to do some data mining, statistical kinds of stuff, right? So Native Americans now are about 3% of the population. So what's left to take from them? We've taken their land. We've taken their families, their language. What's left? Their souls. And so, yeah, let's misappropriate their stuff. Mostly because what? We can. And why can we? Because they're not around to stop us. Right? And so part of this documentary deals with what Native Americans think about white people who take their culture and say, we're going to make dream catchers. Well, do you know what the dream catcher it really is about? It's not just a cute little thing. When you have feathers, when you're doing smudging, do you understand what that means? Because when you don't understand, there are some extreme ramifications to misappropriating cultures. And we're going to watch a video about that. So, did anyone see The Secret? That movie, The Secret, about personal motivation, visioning, and all that kind of stuff, right? So, oh, come on, A.B. Disney. So, this particular video was about one of the feature stars of this that secret movie, who took people and did vision quests and did sweat lodges. And so in this particular, the last sweat lodge that he did, 2 people died as a result of it. And part of the question, so they asked a number of Native elders what they thought about this or why that happened. And they said, well, first of all, we don't build our sweat lodges out of tarp, because there's some they were questioning if the fumes from the tarp or the plastics that were used, so they had lots of plastics and all kinds of stuff on this thing because it wasn't a sweat lodge. And they don't charge. It was a sweat bath, a steam room is what they created, right? For thousands of dollars to engage in this religious practice. And so when we misappropriate cultures, there are some real lives that can be at stake in those events. Which leads me to Mr. Asa Carter. Has anyone ever heard of The Education of Little Tree? Okay. Cool. How did you come across The Education of Little Tree? Can you tell us a little bit about it or what you know about it? Okay, it's been a while, so you're not so sure? Yes.
They did a story on him on Parents Life on NPR,
Yep.
but I had never heard about it before. It was a story about how how he wrote that book and who he really was, and how the discrepancy of what he reported to me and who he had really been, and whether that was, did he then have some epiphany and he understand the value that and created this alternative identity, or was he making a profit?
Yep. So the Education of the Little Tree was turned into a movie, was very popular in the 70s, but resurged in the 1990s by a guy named Asa Carter. And Asa Carter is also Forrest Carter. And Forrest Carter was the speechwriter for Governor George Wallace. And if you're not familiar with Governor George Wallace, you may be familiar with Forrest Carter's, a.k.a. Asa Carter's, most famous line in his speech, which was, "Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." So Forrest Carter was a member of a very noted anti-justice group, also known as the Ku Klux Klan. And so Asa Carter was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, saw that, and so his motivations are convoluted at best, but he was a hate speech writer in the South, who then at some point has an epiphany and changes his identity to Asa Carter and writes this, what becomes known as the the Education of Little Tree. How is that? Why is that problematic? Shouldn't people be able to change who they are? Can't we adjust who we are? What might be problematic with Asa Carter's approach to that? Fundamental lack of understanding. Yes.
And he purports to be Native American.
So he says that he's Native, but he's not.
He's I think there's people that still say he is, but there's no proof that he is. So that base of knowledge.
I am a heart surgeon. I will now begin.
No one recognized him
Nobody recognized him.
or nobody said, "Oh yeah, speak for us."
Yep. Nobody stepped up and said he speaks for us. That's our people, right? He's got nobody backing him up, right? And it becomes problematic because it appears that he did that for one motive. Millions of motives, right? For money. And most often when cultural appropriation happens, it is because the person who is taking wants to add it to themselves for personal gain. I want to look cool. I want to fit in, right? I want to participate. Not what am I doing for this group. Not how am I sharing these things. Now, I will say this, I am somewhat judgmental, but mostly that's because of my age. But I try not to be that, and just, it happens. It'll happen to you. You get old enough, right? But I find it really interesting. I don't know if you've seen these young people who have the things in their ears, right? That are stretching their ears out, or some people do their nose or cheeks and that kind of stuff. Most of the people that I see doing that are white people, which I think is interesting because as I've done some anthropological studies globally, I don't see where white people have done that as a part of their cultural experience. So I get confused as to what is the motive. Because that becomes the core question. What is our motive in doing some of these things? So I'm going to keep going so I can get some of you guys back to class. Again, I'll make this PowerPoint available to you so you can watch it. What if America loved black people as much as it loves black culture? This was a young lady from what's the killing movie with the girl and the fire? Girl on Fire! Woo! Hunger Games, right? So this is a young lady from the Hunger Games, and she got a lot of flack for saying this, but I think it's really true, particularly when I see young people who will go on vacation and get their hair in cornrows on vacation in some foreign country, where people use a comb that they don't know where it's been and who it's been around, and then they come back. Bo Derek kind of, I don't know, you guys aren't old enough to remember Bo Derek. Okay, right? So that kind of stuff. And then we have my girl, who's been under a lot of scrutiny lately, which is Rachel.
Your complexion appears darker than it did in the photos of you as a young lady. Have you done something to darken your complexion?
I certainly don't stay out of the sun, and I also don't, as some of the critics have said, put on blackface as a performance.
And let me address that, because some people have said that the way you've changed your opinion is akin to putting on blackface. And Jonathan Capehart wrote in the Washington Post, blackface remains highly racist, no matter how down with the cause a white person is. Do you understand what he means by that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you agree with
I have a huge issue with blackface. This is not some birth of a nation mockery blackface performance.
Now, the interesting thing about Rachel that I'd like to suggest is that she knows a lot about black culture. I don't know that you can challenge her on any of those things, and she has a response that would come from an understanding of what it means to be African American in America. Uncanny, right? What's the problem with her identity, if you will? She lied! Now, here's the funny thing about it, and I'll just let you in on African Americans. If you ever want to have African American friends, it's really easy. Just show up and be yourself. There's a lady that was in R&B music by the name of Tina Marie. And Tina Marie was the blackest white lady I had ever heard sing. I mean, she could sing like, she could sing better than lots of black people that I knew. But Tina Marie hung out with black people. She dressed like black people. She ate what black people ate. But Tina Marie never said. Black people even called Tina Marie black. But she always was true about who she was. Motive. What do you think the woman from Spokane, the NAACP leader we were just listening to, what do you think her motive was? She's looking for safety, significance, and belonging. Great aspirations. What's her problem? She lied. And when you lie to yourself, that's the hardest part. When you can't be honest with yourself. Right? So we'll make some of that other stuff available. So when we start talking about this idea of cultural misappropriation, now many of you may have to go. Feel free to take your absence. I appreciate all of your time and your attention. So motive becomes really important. So how do I know if I'm appreciating a culture, if I'm appropriating or misappropriating a culture? And I like to make the difference between appropriation and misappropriation. So, for example, appropriation would be you have a hammer and I take your hammer away from you. That's appropriation. Misappropriation would be me taking your hammer, and you know how the hammer has a little flat end, right? And then I try to use it as a screwdriver, right? So that's the difference that I make between appropriation and misappropriation. So not only did you take my hammer, now you're misusing my hammer. Misappropriation. So how do I know if that stuff is so? Well, first of all, who gets honored when you engage in that? When you take that, who gets honored? Who sanctioned you to do it? Who are you in a relationship with that authorized you to do those things? The real question: why are you doing this? Why do you have a need? Is there a hole somewhere in your life? Are there some things that you miss about your own culture, or the fact that you don't recognize what your culture is? What's your intent? And is your intent being measured by its impacts? Right? So is your intention to get fame, notoriety, to help yourself, or are you trying to engage in the culture? Now, I had well, let me finish this. So, what are the impacts, or are the impacts greater than your intent? So, my need to wear a sari. Does the impact of me wearing a sari greater than my intent in wearing the sari? Or are more people offended by the fact that I'm wearing a sari than my intention? And those are things we can go back and forth on, but those are the things we need to think about in terms of looking at relationships with folks. And then context is in direct ratio to culture. Cultures respond to the context, right? So there are certain things that, for example, how many of you have family members who call Brazil nuts by another name? Right? Yeah. Right? So they call them by another name. Did they make that up? Is that a name that they made up themselves? No, they came from a culture at a particular context where that was acceptable. But today, that's not acceptable because what's changed? The context has changed, and so has the culture, right? And I'm talking about Brazil nuts. Older folks would refer to Brazil nuts as the N-word toes. So that's what they would call them, the N-word toes. And so I was showing this. This particular clip is from a movie called 8 Mile. There's a lot of strong language and cursing and that kind of stuff. But that's the story of Eminem in Detroit, right? So when I came to St. Paul, I was living in St. Louis, Missouri. I got a call from one of my mentors, and she said, I'm starting a school, and I want you to teach at my school. And my first answer was, no, I'm not coming up to snow tundra land, right? So it was my mentor. She said, Andre, I really need you to come. So I came. And I found an interesting phenomenon. Well, in St. Louis, it's very much segregated along black and white lines. And everybody knows pretty much where they're supposed to be and what neighborhoods they belong to. But when I came to the Twin Cities, I found it very interesting that the school I taught in was very multicultural and very integrated in terms of where kids were coming from. And it was in the Frogtown area of St. Paul. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that area, or the Midway area of St. Paul. And there were some white kids who had sagging pants, their hat cocked to the side, and they had this whole little thugged out hood urban thing going on. And I was like, what is wrong with these kids? Don't they know that they're acting black? And that's what I thought. Until I sat back and I started looking at my kids, looking at all of my kids. And what do you think I may have come up with as I was looking at my kids? My white kids were acting quasi or quote unquote black. But why? because that's where they lived. They were assimilating. They were making sure that they could survive. Because in the neighborhoods they were coming from, you walk around like this. Hey, that's right. No, just right. It could cause problems. So if I act like everybody else, then I'm cool. So that's a mode of survival. What is your motive? What is your motive? Right. So safety, significance, and belonging becomes the motive to try to fit, not for self-grandizement, right? But as a method of trying to get along with other folks, to be a part of a community. Is your motive around your preference? There are just certain kinds of people that I like being around, and I don't have any qualms in saying that, right? I don't have any qualms. Why? Because I know who I am. And so I don't get defensive when somebody says, well, you or these people. No, I'm not defensive. I know who I am. I know who I want to be around. I know what kind of person I want in my life. And you're not one of those. Right? So that preference becomes important. Adaptation. It's important that we learn how to adapt to the environment that we're in. That's how we've gotten this far. These puppies and the left and right puppies are what got us here. And that's what's going to carry our lineage forward. And then this idea of assimilation. Sometimes we do have to assimilate, right? And I will tell you, I'll let the cat out of the bag. There's sometimes when I'm in mixed audiences, my vernacular is such that I am able to articulate explicitly what I'm trying to communicate to my audiences in a way that they can understand. And then there's times when I'm kicking it with my boys, and we talk how we talk, and we do what we do, right? But I don't do that everywhere I go, because I have to understand that there's a certain amount of assimilation that has to happen if I'm actually going to get things done. Right? And then lastly, yeah, I would call it cultural fluidity. Oh man, I would call it cultural fluidity. That the more we're able to do that, the better off we're able to interact with the world, right? And it's important to be culturally fluid and to know what we're talking about, because the world is watching us. The world is listening to us. One of the things that as the United States we don't necessarily do enough of is take responsibility, the great responsibility that we have as one of these so-called superpowers, because the world's taking its cues from us, right? And here's an example. This comes from a show in Japan. Let's see if it cues up. There's some strong language in this as well.
Good morning, Lina.
Good morning to you, nigga.
Your stop was down, Lina. Motherfucking it's heavy that means I'm crazy, Lina.
And this stock market is more unpredictable, nigga. Nigga. Hey, Mom. You come here, nigga. You're a government, nigga. Chicken and water. Tu hai una buona amica. Oh, darling, my amiga. What a missing here. Oh, mi Santa Masnicado.
I'm going to stop right there. It goes on and on and on. This was a pilot show. That was a pilot for the cable show. So when we talk about this idea of cultural appropriation, it becomes really important that we have some critical conversations about this stuff, because it has some real impacts in the world. And so if you take away anything, I'd like for you to take away the fact that as people are borrowing from other cultures or looking at other cultures, it's the relationship that actually makes the difference. In what ways are you related to the folks that you are assimilating or trying to mimic, right? You know, because the real hurt and harm can come in the fact that those things start to build stereotypes, and it's dehumanizing. It's saying, I can. It's dehumanizing, and it reinforces supremacy. And typically, it's white people who are doing those things. Although, as we saw in the example, Mike Tyson had the warrior tattoo from Polynesian culture. Which I think is really interesting, because has anyone seen The Rock? He's got this huge, my arm used to be that big, but he's got this huge, beautiful tattoo. And is that a culturally appropriated, or is it a culturally appropriate? What do you think?
Part of that culture.
He is in fact Polynesian, right? So it is culturally appropriate. He may he may in fact. I haven't heard any Native Americans confirm and support him and say you can do heart surgery. What's that? Yeah, is he a Canadian Mountie, right? With that crazy hat. Yes, there was a hand in the back. Okay. Thoughts. So I hit you with a lot of stuff and a lot of picture propaganda and all this kind of stuff. Thoughts, conversations. What are you thinking? Yeah.
From our class, I like to be a virtual devil's advocate. So,
Devil does not need an advocate.
Okay.
He's been evil longer than you've been alive.
What about the idea that imitation is the best form of flattery?
What do you mean? Imitation is the best form of flattery. Flattery. Exactly. He's got a good point. Is that just annoying?
So,
Do you feel flattered?
No.
Oh, okay. There it is.
You think about in terms of the art world, how they appropriate images and symbols.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think art and comedy are for artists. It's two kinds of black people. I start down that path, it's inappropriate for me, right? Why? I'm not a comedian. Move over, doctor. I'm going to take over. Right? Inappropriate because I'm not a doctor. So when we start talking about, roles like artists and that kind of stuff, certainly. Although I do think that sometimes people take meanness and try to crouch it and I'm being artistically expressive. No, that was just mean what you did. Right? I think there was an art piece that had a cross in a cube of urine, and he said that was art. And I'm like, I don't know, it seemed kind of mean to me. I'm trying to see the artistic, right? And so one person's art is someone else's thing. But again, it's the intention and it's the relationship that you have with folks that actually determines how the stuff becomes culturally misappropriation or not. And I think the more we have these conversations, and there's this big conversation out in the ethos around cultural competence. No, not cultural competence. Politically correctness, right? That we need to be politically correct. I think that's hogwash. I don't think we need to be politically correct. I think we need to care about the people that we're communicating with enough not to be disrespectful. That's what we need.
What's correct in politics?
Yeah, what's correct in, right? It's like business ethics. Those are oxymorons. There is no business ethics. Yeah. Anything else? Yes. So when I was younger, I had a problem with this then, but didn't have enough voice to do it. I was with a group of people, and they said that they had been sanctioned by a Lakota tribe to give out Native names. As a young person, I received one of those Native names. As a grown person, I don't use that Native name because it did not come from a Lakota that I knew. And there are no Lakota that will say you're okay to do surgery. Right? So you're right. So oftentimes people will make up stuff, or maybe it did actually happen that way. But if you ask, it'd be curious to ask him if he knows anything about who he says he's been adopted by, and who is your daddy? Who's your daddy? Right? So what's your pedigree? What's all that stuff? And it's so funny that we want to glob on to other things because we don't know who we are. Where do white people come from? Do not say St. Cloud or Duluth. Where do white people come from? Really? Where? Where do black people come from? Black people don't exist. Neither do white people. You came from a piece of land somewhere on this planet. Where? Where did you come from? Where are your people? What practices do they have? What's their culture, right? Because if I don't know, then I will go to my default, which is American. I'm American. Well, we're all American. But no. I'm American. It's so funny, when I taught high school, I asked my kids, I said, tell me something about your cultural background, what's going on. My black kids, boom, 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 boom. My Hispanic kids, boom, 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 boom. My Liberian kids, boom, 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 boom. My Hispanic kids, boom, 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 boom. My Southeast Asian kids, boom, 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 boom. My white kids. Well, I'm American. No, we get that. But where are you from? Well, I gave up all of that stuff so I could become this. Why? Is there something wrong with it? Well, why? If people would quit hyphenating their stuff, then we could all be the same. Why do people always keep hyphenating and separating us? We'd be good if we were all the same. We tried that already. Before we had the hyphens. And in my case, other people made up names for us. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Roots. You ever see that movie? Okay, so it's an old movie. Alex Haley's book is like this big, and the movies are long and that kind of stuff. But there's something that happened in the beginning of the movie. So they kidnap this one particular man who the story kind of pivots around, and his name is Kunta Kinte. He's played by the Reading Rainbow guy, LeVar Burton. Right? Or Geordie LaForge from Star Trek. Any Trekkies up in the... Yeah, all right, live long and prosper. No, that's the wrong one. Wrong show. Right? Anyway, no, that's right. Yeah, that's right show. Okay, it was just... I can't do it on this hand. Anyway, so LeVar Burton, so they strap him down, and they said, what's your name? He said, Kunta Kinte. They said, no, your name is Toby. And then that kept going until finally the guy said, what's your name? And he said, my name is Toby. What happened? Broke his soul. Got him. And so when we allow those things to happen, we have a broken soul. When we don't know who we are, we have a broken soul. And so we keep trying to fill it with stuff and grabbing stuff and doing stuff. There's a game that I make reference to in your handout called Cards Against Humanity. Most awful thing I've ever heard of in my life. And some of you are smiling because you must have played it. Look, I see you all back there, right? I got some holy water in the thing. We just splash it over you. There's a confession booth around the corner, and you can get you hooked up, right? No, just absolutely horrible, 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 horrible. Because it doesn't lift us up, it brings us down. It brings down our humanity. Well, Andre, you're just a wet blanket. You're not trying to let us have any fun. No, I don't want you to have fun at the expense of somebody else. Because at some point, 2050, the joke might be on you. Right? And then that stuff's not very fun. You know what I mean by 2050? Is everybody familiar with that? 2050? Demographic shift where in the United States, white people then become the numeric minority in the United States. Right? Yes.
So I see a lot of individuals for the yoga class, and at the end of the class, the instructor says namaste, and I always kind of it doesn't feel right, I guess.
Who's the instructor's daddy?
I don't know, but I just
right?
But the intent, I know the intent is good.
Sort of.
They're saying, I see you.
Yep,
You're
and you
separate,
see,
right?
yep.
So I understand that. Then I think, but that's not the culture you were.
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's a difference between saying, hola to someone, because that's what you say, and then seeing a cute little Latino kid, and you go, oh my goodness, oh, hola, hola, right? I mean, the difference is a context, and secondly, because I did yoga for a long time and love, I'm good at the truth. And at the end I'd say namaste too, and sometimes I might greet somebody with namaste. I'm not Muslim, but sometimes if I see a Muslim person, I'll say assalamu alaikum, which is a greeting. It's and they'll say salaikum salam, walaikum salam, and that kind of stuff. Or I know a little bit of Arabic, and I'll say mabruk, right? So it means congratulations and that kind of stuff. Well, I know something about the culture. I'm related to it. I delved into it. I've been a part of those things. So that's natural. But if I'm just saying it because and I don't have any consciousness of what it means, why, how it's related to anything else, then that would be inappropriate.
Or keep these individuals too. I mean,
Yeah. I'd imagine that if you're doing yoga for any length of time, that especially somebody's good when they're like, let's get down in savasana, and they use all the as opposed to let's just do downward dog. Can we do squirrel pose? They just. That's how somebody. I don't know, but I think that's more real, right? So who are they related to? Who are they? That kind of stuff. And I think you can also be interested in other cultures and in other things without having to take it. I don't have to take it to be interested in it, right? I go to the Walker Art Museum. They have a lot of cool stuff I'm interested in, but I'm not trying to touch it. I'm not trying to take it off the wall. I'm not trying to put it in my, I'm not trying to take it on because it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. And so those are some important pieces. But most importantly is know who you are, so you know what works, what doesn't work. And here's the scary truth: that who you are showing up is enough. That is truth enough. There needs to be no other explanation of your existence than you showing up. Who you are is adequate truth enough of everything that you've been around, everything that you've experienced, everything that you are. Just showing up as you is enough. You don't have to embellish. You don't have to add anything. You are enough.
But
Yes.
do you really have right to or it is dominated by the
Oh yeah, no, that's a good question. Her question was, do we actually have the right to show up and be who we are? I would say for some of us, it's a lot easier than others of us, right? I was in a conversation, and we're talking.
For instance, when I went to the
Yeah.
if I really want to be culturally, I have to show so it will look kind of awkward. Yeah.
Yeah, why would it look awkward here?
But most of the area here, like I go wherever, okay, if I go to Walmart, for instance, and they say hello to me.
Yeah.
And if I say something,
And there's two ways to look at that, right?
no, it's not practically so rightful, I guess. But I don't know.
It depends on how much you want to give away of yourself, right? So if you greet someone and you say namaste, and they go, whose problem is that? It's their problem, because you're being true to yourself. However, I understand the need to try to assimilate.
Yeah.
And assimilation works until it stops you from getting those three things that we talked about earlier: significance, belonging, and safety. When you have to give up pieces of yourself that deny you one of those three things, then that's gone too far, right? So that's the balance that we have to strike all the time, and particularly those of us who are in a numeric minority in this particular country. Those are negotiations we have to make all the time, right? for example, in my multicultural counseling class, I talk about the fact that I can't get mad. I can't get mad. Why? It scares people. Oh, he's crazy, wild black man. He's going to hurt me because he's mad. Just because I'm mad does not mean I'm going to be violent. But somewhere in our psychology in this particular country, those things have been linked. That if Andre's mad, it's going to hurt me. And so, and it's funny because women do similar things, right? So women don't necessarily come all the way to workplaces, to educational settings, or mixed environments as themselves, because sometimes they got to laugh at those jokes that they know are hurtful, or have to. One of the students in one of my classes was talking about being at the gym and knowing that people are looking at her as she's working out, not because they want to get to know her. And the funny thing that she said is, they don't think I know it because they're behind me, but I'm looking in the mirror as I'm running, looking at them looking at me. But she chooses not to say anything. Because right now, working out on that machine, she gets more out of that than she does those people, right? So, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Okay. Any other thing? I hope this was helpful. I hope it wasn't a downer. It's not supposed to be a downer. This is supposed to be a pick-me-up, a thought-provoking, engaging conversation.
I think anytime we have the opportunity to learn more about how our behavior influences others.
Yeah, it is. The more we can eliminate those blind spots, the better we can see, right? And there are certainly powers and controlling interests that don't want us to be critical thinkers. They don't want us to ask questions. They want us to keep our heads down with our blinders on and just keep doing what you're doing. Because you start asking too many questions, it causes them problems. Right? Because you may actually expect an answer, and they don't want to give you the answer. So, my name is Andre Cohen. Thank you so much for your time. So, if there's anybody else who has questions or anything, I'll be around for the next half hour or so and entertain us. Yeah, if you can give me your email, I'll make sure that we send that out.
And I would say that you have some.
Do I? Okay. Yeah, I